Hey you, how you doing? My name is Tommy, and in this video, I'm gonna be breaking down my secret weapon that I use to ultimately get onboarded to new offers quickly, as well as be able to close efficiently. And it's the process I walk through when helping business owners be able to better close deals as well as scale up. Because a lot of these are really just principles, and if you understand the principles, it's going to give you the tools you need to succeed without additional headache. So, I'm going to be taking you through my ultimate checklist, I guess you could say. And I'm just going to share my screen and kind of start off from there and give you a couple of examples that you can use to understand. So hopefully you can see this. But essentially, we're talking about what I call the 18 gates of the sale. Now, 18 gates of the sale is a hypothesis that I have, which is essentially that there's 18 points that have to be checked off or unlocked by the sales process and by the closer and by the marketing to ultimately allow you to make a sale. And if you can consistently top to bottom unlock these, essentially everybody buys. So that is what this is based around. Now, I learned this process from a guy, his name's Cole Gordon. Not specifically this, but more so the way of thinking. And I just kind of observed what he did, and I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Because what he was really good at, is still good at, is taking direct response marketing and combining it with a consistent sales process top to bottom. And I believe that he got a good amount of his insight from Todd Brown as well as Sam Ovens and the way Sam Ovens thinks. And that's kind of helped me refine out some of the nuances that he doesn't specifically cover in his mastermind, which I think is like $50,000. Um, but that's who I ultimately got this from in terms of principles. The expression of it is also through all the different sales training I've been through. Because at this point, I mean, I have a massive notes database, but I've been through probably like 5 to 7 different high level coaching programs in terms of sales specifically, like NEPQ, Cole Gordon stuff, Bill Walsh's stuff, Steve Smarridge, a couple of other people as well. I've learned some stuff from Kurt Udale, Kyle Tso, etc. And what I realized going through this is that fundamentally all sales hits on the same psychological principles if you distill it down to its basics. Now, then the question becomes, well, how do different sales processes come into existence? It comes down to the preferences of the salespeople as well as the mentality of the business owner for how they created the process. But ultimately, all of them will hit on the same points. They just may do it in a different order and they may use different ways to hit on the same points. But all of that disclaimer aside, 18 gates of the sale. So these are essentially like checkpoints, or that's how I try to think about them as like different checkpoints. And the way I try to think about it is like if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings, um, the Siege of Minas Tirith, I believe it is. I think about it in terms of that visual, where at the when the orcs or whatever are invading, there's like the main gate, and then there's like up at the top, there's like where the king is. Now the thing is, it's not just one gate at the bottom, and then you can walk all the way up to the top. There's actually like a huge amount of gates you have to go through to get to the top. That's where I ended up coming up with the thought process for this. Because if the main gate is opened, you don't need to use a tool to open it. You just walk through. And the same thing is true when we think about these different psychological points in a sales process. If someone walks onto your call and they tell you their goal, their pain, their doubt, the cost of inaction, why they need to make a change now, it's now or never, they're going to die tomorrow, like all that stuff within the first 3 minutes, you're going to look like a dumbass if you start using your script because you're not actually listening. Are scripts important? They're important for you to understand the psychological principles, but that's why some people are script dummies, is because they give you all this leverage and then you just kind of ignore it and you just kind of ask questions to get answers you've already got. Like, dude, if the gate's already open, just walk through it. So that's what has created this. Now you might be wondering, okay, Tommy, like how can I use this? Or how can I understand it, wrap my head around it? There's really 3/4 places things will be unlocked for people. And that's going to be, and I'll just scroll down here, it's going to be marketing specifically, meaning like in the marketing ahead of time through case studies, testimonials, the actual ads themselves, all those things. Marketing is going to unlock some of these things, or it's going to unlock it partially. And then on the sales call, have to be fully unlocked. The sales call and the triage call. You can unlock some of these things depending on the prospect that you're speaking to. You can do that literally with them right then and there if you know what you're doing. If you don't, well, maybe you should probably figure it out. Now, the other thing is going to be the actual person themselves. For example, if I'm talking with someone who's like a high level entrepreneur who their whole life has been taking ownership, extreme accountability, etc., they potentially could still need help with that, but chances are that's already an inbuilt principle in them that I don't need to unlock. Versus someone who's a little bit lower level, they're a little bit more unsophisticated, they're used to making excuses, blames, etc., and then looking to other people for help with stuff because their life sucks. Well, responsibility and ownership is definitely going to have to be something that you unlock for them, that you go heavy on to make sure that that gate is actually opened. That's how I think through this. Now, how do you go through and actually use this in practical life? Excellent question. So, I'm going to use an example where I actually did this. And so, this is a company. Their name's raisingcapital.com. Super great company, super great people. Their whole process, I essentially had to do this with because the process I typically did, which is like a one call close where it's like a VSL into an application or into a setter who calls them, who then puts them on my calendar, and then I do a one call close on them. And if they don't buy, they're probably never coming back. That sort of a scenario. This was different. And so there were three avenues that people would come from: phone setting, an ad, or DM setting. If it was an ad, they would go to a PDF, which would kind of break down things at a high level without the investment. And then Freya, who was the setter at the time, or I guess she's more of like a lead nurture specialist, technically. She would go ahead and call them, make sure that they knew where they were supposed to go, and then they would obviously book a time to be able to like do a triage with myself or with one of the other members of the team. If it was a phone call, this whole process would happen on the call. If it was a DM setting call, this process would happen throughout the DM setting process and then the video. And then by the time they got to this call, we would know, okay, where exactly did they come from? That type of stuff. And then I would run a process based off of that to see if it was even worth our time to do a demo call, which is here. In between the demo call, they would have the VSL with targeted testimonials. And then we would pitch, and then this is where the objection handling would take place. So that is the process. Now, excuse me. When it comes to this, I had to essentially go through top to bottom, look at all the funnels, look at all the ads, look at everything, and then see, okay, which one of these are checked off, and which ones am I gonna need to check off on the triage enough for me to get them onto this second call, but not so much that I go beyond 15 minutes because this was like supposed to be a 15-minute call. Cool. And then what am I going to do and how I'm going to handle this process on here? Because to be honest, like going from a one call into a multi-call with a lot more variables was extremely challenging for me. But because I had this, it helped me kind of navigate it and make things easier. And as a result of it, moving forward, every offer that I hop on when I use this process, I understand, okay, these are the three objections I'm probably going to get. Or these are the big sticking points in my sales process I'm going to have to get really good at for this specific offer in order for me to be able to close. Another example that I'll point out, there's a guy who I closed for a little bit. He's like big in like the Airbnb space. Now, the challenge that the whole sales team kept running into was we would get people bought in on this is the right, or we would get them bought in on like they need to take action now, their goals, we would get them in that sort of a buying state. And then almost every single time at the very end, they're like, okay, I definitely know I need to do something. I just don't know if Airbnb is the way I want to do real estate. At which point, the deal is kind of sunk. Now, we could try to pre-handle it, then the call would take around 90 minutes. It'd be double the time. And even then, there was no guarantee that they would actually close, depending on a couple other factors. So that was a sticking point that made the whole team suffer because we didn't handle that earlier and get people bought in onto the vehicle itself. So that's just an example. So if you go through kind of like what I walked you through, which I'm sure you could like pause it and see, okay, this, that, or the other thing, those are the questions that you're going to need to have answered. If you're curious on like that type of stuff, you can just find me on Facebook or on Instagram and you can message me, and I'm more than happy to kind of provide the doc to you. Maybe I'll ask you a couple questions about where you are in your journey, but like in terms of what that is, I'm more than happy to help. So Hopefully that makes sense and this wasn't too confusing. If it was confusing, please let me know in the comments. I'll try to redo this again or make this a little bit simpler. But essentially, if I had to boil this down into a nutshell, is all sales processes are the same. They all hit on the same fundamental psychological points. Now, with that being said, it's important for you as a closer to be able to do your job by understanding what you're going to face on your call. And then as a business owner, if you want to have your closers not actually need to be as skilled at closing, if you have this whole process dialed in ahead of time and can tell them what they'll face, you can build a script around it and you can train them on the script. And then once they train on the script, there's no additional variables that have to be taken into account because you've already taken care of it earlier. And because you've taken care of it earlier, it's predictable. And then you have a little bit more leverage where you can ultimately just bring in more people. And it makes this whole business more scalable because there's less things you have to worry about because you've accounted for everything. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, any questions whatsoever, please let me know. And if you want this specific document, the 18 gates, just let me know as well.